Wow, what an honor to be among such storytellers. Now this is just blows me away because I'm a beginning storyteller and I am telling my mother's stories. And it's from the Doukhobor past, and this one is from the valley. So I thought this would be a good place to tell it. And I'm sorry, I will be reading some of it. But it takes place in Appledale, a lot of it. There's a road there that's called Vallican Road, and the story is about Mrs. Vallican, who was a matchmaker in the valley. And she brought many, does anyone know Vallican? They're probably related to Mrs. Nastya Vallican. And the story also has another character in the valley, Mr. Cunningham. And he used to own the Glade, or the general store in Crescent Valley. I can see some nods. And he owned a lot of land around the Crescent Valley General Store. And he's a character in this story also. We know his daughter, his granddaughter actually. My mother knew his daughter, so he's a very well-known character. So I'm going to read a lot of this. Forgive me, I'm not as experienced as these wonderful storytellers that we've had so far. So this is called Getting Uncle Bill Married. And as it said, it's my mother's story. Lisa, get up right now. We have to marry Bill. I woke up groggily. My younger sister Luba sound asleep next to me. It was early March morning, sort of like this, cold at night. But it was still dark outside, the air crisp and cold. There were frost on the window panes, you know, the ones in the old times when you just have single panes and they paint patterns on them. Well, I didn't want to get up at all, but it was Dedushka, my grandfather Hudika. And there was no talking back to Dedushka. You didn't fool around with him. We have to marry Bill, and the bus comes soon, so get up quickly. My Dedushka's gnarled hand prodded my shoulder. My bleary eyes peeked over the blankets, and there he was, short, grizzled hair, lined face set into a very determined line, and he wore those red checkered jackets that were so popular in those days. What was he talking about? What did he want? Well, Uncle Bill was my mama's youngest brother. He was only just 7 years older than my 16 years. I was just 16 then. But he was tall and he was lanky with huge hands and huge feet, and he was very, very shy. A good man, but painfully shy. He was scared to talk to anybody. Even when he was asked to talk to people, he wouldn't talk. What was I going to do with getting him married? Well, anyway, I pulled on my long woolen stockings, my woolen skirt and woolen blouse that we wore in those days. And Dedushka said, you and Bill are taking the bus to Appledale. And there's a matchmaker there. And she will know a girl Bill can marry. Ooh, that's my job. And so it was, an early March morning. In 1936, when I would usually have been in our greenhouse. Remember, we made a living selling plants and growing all these vegetables. Well, I would have been seeding maybe tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers, and maybe transplanting some of the younger bedding plants. I was stuck with getting Uncle Bill married off. Anyway, it was just getting light. Dedushka waved down the bus. It was a Greyhound bus right in front of our house in Thrums. And Uncle Bill and I got on. I was dressed in my best coat, and I had long honey-colored braids then. But Uncle Bill, he was in a brown suit with rubber boots on. He was sitting, he sort of seemed happy going, but he was sitting quietly, relying on me to plan everything. I was 16. So now that I had time to think about the chore I was on, I was getting a bit worried. I didn't know Mrs. Vallican, the matchmaker. I didn't know anyone she might send this to. But you know, among Doukhobors, people were, friends everywhere. And I sort of took that to heart, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I could do this. And anyways, with Diedushka, there wasn't any choice. He gave me this job. I had to do it. So I had to think of something to say them. Anyway, we changed buses at Vallican. The bus continued on to Nelson. And we took an orange bus up to Appledale. And guess who drove that bus? It was Mr. Cunningham. He owned that Crescent Valley store. He drove the bus. He had cows. He even went door to door selling embroidery thread in those days. A lot of women used to embroider. So he would sell embroidery thread and needle. You could a whole assortment of them. I don't know how he managed, but he did everything. And everyone knew him. And he had 3 sons, and boy, they worked hard too. And there was his daughter that I knew very well, his daughter Barbara. And she used to be friendly to me. We would talk, and she would tell me. Well, eventually he moved to Thrums, and her husband ran the Thrums General Store that was there at the time. So we got off in Appledale by the side of the road and walked back to the Appledale store. The storekeeper, they all knew where everybody lived. So he knew where Berikov lived, and he told us to, just walk down a road called Berikov Road. And Uncle Bill and I walked down there. It seemed quite a ways, because I wasn't sure about where we're going, and it was cold, and it was crispy. So, we got there, and I can still see the Berikov so clearly. Mrs. Berikov, she was sort of round. She was Zhirnaya. She had a round face, round body, and she was dressed in layers and layers of skirts, layers of blouses, a plateau on her hair. Some of these little old ladies that you see sometimes, maybe not now, but a long time ago, they're all dressed up. And she had a husband, Mitya, and he was a tall, thin-looking man. He was a really delovoy muzhik, which means he was really hardworking. And he was really clever too, clever with his hands, and he would help the Doukhobor community a lot. They were building in those days, and they had the factory, the brick factory in those days close to their place. So he helped them a lot. And they had a daughter, Chunka, who was a little younger than me. Anyway, somehow Mrs. Berikov knew why we had come. There must be sort of a Doukhobor grapevine. And understanding that we felt a little awkward, she first of all relaxed us and told us where she was from. She said, I'm from Alberta. I'm a Shkaratov. And I met my husband in Alberta when he was down there stoking the hay. And they used to come from the valley here to help with the haying in Alberta. And people from Alberta would come here and bring the grain here, so they all worked together. And I met my husband, and he brought me here to the valley. Anyway, she took a good, long look at Bill. And yes, she said, yeah, Bill should be married. I mean, he was 23. But how, Auntie? I shook my head and, said, I don't know how to marry him. But she says, well, we just have to introduce him to the right person. And she thought about where she would send us. Well, she thought of this Papa family who was, lived in a village down the road. The Berikovs lived in a farm, but there was a village down the road, and the Papa family lived in that village. And she says, they have lots of children, and that oldest girl, she's about your uncle's age. So the mother of this family, this Papa family, had married 3 husbands. And her first husband, Papa, passed away. So she remarried a Savana, and these are all true names. And he died soon after too. Boy, a little unlucky. And then she married another Papa. Papa is a popular name around here. So she had children with each husband, and she had quite a few children. So the family lived in the next village, and Tunka took us over there. We walked over there, and she was really chatty, and we felt comfortable with her, and we soon became friends. So the snow on the ground crunched as we walked, and Uncle Bill was walking beside us, and he seemed okay. He was quiet, but he was walking alongside of us. The Papa family greeted us at the door, and I had to explain why we were there. I could see that they were quite poor, and there were a lot of children in the house. So they invited us in, and Uncle Bill and I sat on a bench, and Mrs. Papa sat just across from us with her daughter, Poila, her oldest daughter. She was a dark-haired, quite short. She was quite a bit shorter than Uncle Bill. Remember, he was tall, and she was quite short, and she was a really strong, sturdy-looking lady, but she seemed pleasant. Her mother, she looked like she was a bit stern, and she was a big, strong woman, a rather hefty body on her. But anyways, we sat across from each other, and I had to do the talking. And whether I liked it or not, I was supposed to get Uncle Bill married. So I did say Uncle Bill was a kind man. He was quiet, but he worked hard on the farm, and he would like to marry. And Mrs. Verica said that Poila would be a good match. So Poila and Uncle Bill sat together for a while on the same bench, but there still wasn't much talking. So we went back to Verica's that night, and among the Duke Boers, you always invite people to stay overnight. And so we stayed over that night, and the next day we went back to the Papas. And they had been talking, and they said they understood, they heard that the Hoodigans were a good family, and that they were respectable, and they agreed to an engagement too. So I think we were glad to marry Poila off, and I think she was glad to leave that family too. They did have a stepbrother, and he was sort of eyeing me out of the corner of his eye, but I didn't look at the looks of him at all, and I had to turn my back on him and leave him. He was short, and Anyway, we went home that day. Hoodigans did visit the Papas a couple of times in Appledale. They took that same bus. I never did go back, though I really was fond of Mrs. Vera, because she even gave me a little platorchik that she had. And I would have liked to have seen Tunica again. But there was this boy, which is an engagement party in Russian. And shortly after that, Uncle Bill and Poila got married. They had a good wedding. There was borscht, and there was piragi and plov. It was great. There was a dance, and it was so nice to see them happy together. It was wonderful. Well, they moved into Thrums, and they lived with Babushka and Dedushka in the same house for a while. And they did get their own house eventually. You know what, that brilliant dam that we were talking to Greg about? Well, when it was built, it flooded a lot of Thrums, all the bottom land there. That was really good for agriculture. And a lot of the neighbors were given money to leave, but Hoodigans didn't want to leave. This was their home for a long time. So instead of taking money for the land, they were given the neighbors' houses. And that's where Uncle Bill and Poila moved in. And they had a good life. They both got diabetes later on, though. And that was because they ate way too much sugar. Uncle Bill was young. Dedushka would say, give that boy what he wants. He could have all the sugar he wants, even in borscht. Even in watermelons, he would put sugar. Anyway, but they had a good life. And Poila liked to talk a lot. She would tell me all kinds of stories. She sort of made up for Uncle Bill's silence. And she said that when her mother remarried for a third time, she was left with her aunt in Utishinya. And she had a good life there. She was sort of an only child there, and she liked to draw, and she liked to cook, and she liked to spend time with her aunt. But you know what? Her mom sort of stole her back. She wasn't happy about that. I think it was to maybe help raise her babies. But Poila would have been better off with her aunt in Utishinya. She maybe could have gotten education. So Poila and Bill had a fine life. He respected her, and she respected him, and they got along well enough. When Uncle Bill died, Poila gave him a decent funeral. Prayers, singing, a farewell meal, and in those days they had to stay up for 3 days and 3 nights for the funerals. It was sad, though, that Poila didn't have a funeral. They didn't have any children, so when Bill died, Poila moved in with her relatives. And you know what? they said there wasn't enough money for a funeral. That was sad. It wasn't right. Anyway, that was quite the experience getting Uncle Bill married. And thank you for Mrs. Vera, who arranged that. Paula was a really good wife for him. And I'd like to introduce my mother, whose story this is. She's sitting right here. Mom, do you want to stand up?